clarity and commonality.
That's correct. That issue was raised within a recent, I think it was the Transport and Business Forum.
Yeah. I think there's quite a bit of merit in that, because some of the things that we're seeing, in fact, COVID has merely accelerated some stuff that was already happening, and has hurried us along a bit, which is essentially no bad thing, really. We knew where we were headed, it's just brought it upon us a bit quicker. And were you suggesting making the number back up to 5 with a potential catastrophe scenario? And I'm quite enamored of that, because having seen the news from Germany over the last 10 days, a couple of shifts of the compass could have seen that land here, not there. So I think catastrophizing, if that's even a word, merits some consideration.
Again, that was the views of the Business Forum. I think they considered that all the options we were putting forward were very optimistic, and it would make sense to kind of consider worst case. So that is definitely in the
optimistic. Yes, yeah. Let's not be too optimistic. Let's not have an optimism bias or too much of it.
Quite. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Steve. Got the other Steve now. Councillor Steve Reid, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ben, that was really useful, really informative. You know, I've been on this board now for a few years, and I've seen this evolve, and it's really pleasing to see where you've got to, and taking that strategic view. My question, and possibly this might be a question for David Carter, is how does this piece of work interface, and firstly apologize to members, it doesn't impact on my question, how does this piece of work interface with the SDS that is being developed by WECA at the moment?
So Ben, do you want to go first, or do you want me to pick it up?
If I could just say something very briefly, and then David kick me under the virtual table if I say anything wrong. I think the idea is, because of the time frame that we're looking at within this plan, that we're looking at that 2050 time frame. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not quite sure what the dates are of that other document you're looking at, but I assume it's before 2051. So I'm hoping that once this plan is approved, it could then be used as part of the supporting evidence and perhaps directing that kind of strategic travel and strategic thinking within the West of England plan. But David, sorry, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, so I clearly I'm representing the CA in the guise of the mayor in this case, as well as being a technical officer, I suppose. But the evidence base that was put together for the STP included all the existing and emerging spatial plans. So to a degree, the spatial growth at a very high level has been considered in terms of the transport network. We're obviously in a very different world than we were probably even 10 years ago in terms of transport planning. I can't remember what the mantra was in the decarbonisation report. We've moved from predict and provide to decide and provide, or something along those lines. There was a little caption. That's government policy. So in some senses, it's not just about inevitably just creating sufficient demand for the spatial development. It's looking at actually measures to change people's travel behaviour, and that's part of the STP. So it sits, I suppose this is where the technical complexity comes in, Councillor Reid. Ideally, and STBs across the country have been making this point to the DFT, there would be some statutory weight behind the strategic transport plan, which would then flow into and iterate with local spatial plans, the SDS in the case of WECA, and the local plans in our particular peculiar part of the world, Steve. And that's how it should operate. At the moment, all we get from government, and I'm looking at Parvis on the screen and Alan, is that we get that it will be taken into consideration in Highways England's plans and Network Rail's plans. So I think that's as much to go, but it should be, ideally, it should be a statutory consideration. At the moment, it's just a kind of policy consideration for our partner organisations, and that includes us ourselves as Transport and Highway authorities.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, David. Just the last is a point. I'm not expecting an answer. You referred to 20-minute neighbourhoods. Locally, we're talking about 15-minute neighbourhoods. I don't see much difference. Depends on how fast you walk. Thank you, Ben.
Have we lost Mike?
Yeah, I've just admitted him back into the lobby.
Sorry, you've just got me back again. So apologies, I lost a minute or so there. Steve, are you happy with what you've just heard now?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks very much. Councillor Ray Bryan, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Ben, a super presentation and very informative, so thank you for that. One of my concerns is several times during your report you mentioned the word powerhouse, and obviously we have the Western Gateway subnational transport body and the Western Gateway, of which both BCP and Dorset Council only feature in one of them. And I'm just a bit concerned now that, being as our new chairman sits in one of the areas that is outside of the powerhouse, I think we need to get this situation resolved fairly quickly, because it's a known fact that for funding now, the powerhouses will receive far more attention than other people seeking funds. And I think it's important that we are seen as a Western Gateway body to be as muscular and as big as we possibly can. So I'm actually going to ask the chairman, sorry Mike, to progress this, because I think it's important. It's no secret we wrote to Catherine Bennett last year. It was put on hold. We can't, I don't think as a group, wait much longer for the decision, because there's so much to do. And whilst there appears to be some money floating around, I want to make sure we're in the best possible position to grab it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ray, and I would absolutely endorse that. We recognise that the subnational transport bodies have been set up to align with the desire for increased economic activity, and also, of course, through housing as well. If we are going to maximise that, we should be geographically aligned with the other authorities who are bidding for that money, because we all sitting around this virtual table know exactly how transport drives the economic activity, and economic activity drives transport. So I would, like Ray, I would appreciate any help that we can get from officers to push the case forward, to allow those members that are not members of the Western Gateway Powerhouse at the moment to become members, so that we can align with our transport body. Could I just see if do we have any objections to that? Otherwise, could we could we accept that that is a request for officers to try to progress as soon as possible? Okay, in that case, I don't see any objection to it, so let's do that then, please. Thank you. I can't see any more hands up, so Ben, thank you so much. That was extremely useful, I think, particularly for those who haven't been members for some time, to really get an idea of the activity that we're involved in as a transport body, and how that might progress over the course of the near to medium future. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So should we now move on to Nuala and the programme of finance update, which again is very much about the work that we as a body are doing. Now there are quite a lot of items of this part of it, and also a significant number of recommendations. So what I suggest that we do is we go first of all through the report from front to back, if you like. Then we'll go through and get any questions, and then we'll move to the recommendations. Actually, having said that, let's do it section by section of the report, and any questions that come up on that would be useful, but then we will go back to the recommendations right at the end. So over to you, Nuala.
No problem. I'm just going to share my screen just for ease of the conversation, if that's okay. So just
we do all have a copy of this, of course, Nuala. Yes. Yep.
Okay. Right. Just Just so as part of the work programme, just to let councillors know what we've been through and what we've delivered so far. So that's just for noting, for information. The other point of section 1.4 is to just bring to note, these were the agreed projects that we had in this year's work pack programme. And these were the forecasted outcomes that the board had previously agreed that we would be delivering as a result of these programmes. So don't propose to go through this in great detail, because we'll talk about them in a bit more detail when we go through the project updates, if that's okay.
Please. Any other thoughts on that? Are we able to go on to ask Nuala to go on, please?
Okay.
Nuala.
Yeah. Just so in relation to an update on the delivery for projects, our strategic model project is progressing to programme, and will be due to deliver in September, which is will be shared with Highways England as well, so to inform their thinking on modelling for the M4 Dorset South Coast study. In relation to the strategic transport plan, you just had an update from Ben. So next steps really for the programme team is to look about how we procure the phase 2 technical assessment work, which is programmed to start in December. In relation to the carbon audit, you've had an update. You will be having an update later from Robert Murphy. We had an original programme where we were due to deliver earlier. However, we delayed to wait for the decarbonisation strategy. So there was just slight variance to programme as we expressed it in March's board. But that was for practical reasons rather than anything else. So in relation to next steps, we will be working closely with the Combined Authorities Transport Decarbonisation Project to make sure that future scenarios are modelled and as part of that toolkit. We will also be looking about where we store that tool so that it can be made use to officers to understand decarbonisation and use the toolkit. So we hope that that will be shared with officers to make use. In relation to the freight project, we have been in discussions with David Elvey from the Department for Transport, and we're working closely with him. We've also been in conversations with our neighbouring STB, the Peninsula STB, and what senior officers have agreed to, and one of the things we need to seek recommendation or final approval from the board, is that we conduct a joint study with the Peninsula STB. Feedback that we've had so far from freight operators is that this makes sense to them because freight operates on a regional basis. So it's a very pragmatic approach, and so the recommendation is supported by not only the senior officers but the freight operators for the region. We are doing work at the moment in thinking about how we conduct that. We've held an initial workshop with some freight operators so that we can progress that project. That's a key input into our strategic transport plan that Ben has just discussed with officers, because it's freight and freight movements and how we decarbonise freight will be key for the region as a whole. And it's something that we felt was worth spending time and effort on. So that I think Councillor Green is one of the recommendations that we're seeking decision for today. Shall I pause there and ask if that's okay?
I suggest that we just quickly pop through, if you don't mind, if we just pop through the rest of the programme items, and then we'll come to all the recommendations.
Okay, no problem. So as James is going to discuss in paper B, we will be bringing a discussion about station accessibility. So we were conducting a piece of work and we were ready to procure, but the Department of Transport has obviously superseded that element of work with their own stations accessibility programme. So discussions are still underway in relation to that, and also in relation to the integrated smart ticketing. So James will run through through that in more detail in paper as part of paper B, if that's okay. So in relation to alternative fuels, what is progressing at the moment is we've been working closely with one of our neighbouring STBs in Midlands Connect. They are due to undertake a piece of work which effectively maps out from freight perspective where the optimum sites and locations are to put in fuel depots or alternative fuel depots such as hydrogen or electric charging sites. I think that's a very important piece of work that we will be undertaking shortly as soon as we can get commercial agreement in place with Midlands Connect. That piece of work is also a dependency with our freight project, so it's hopefully that will progress shortly. We have been having discussions with the Department of Transport representatives from alternative fuels and electric vehicles, just to understand and make sure that we align our thinking in relation to alternative fuels. And one of the things that they've mentioned to us is they are working on an electric vehicle charging strategy. So we're working closely with them to understand where that's moving towards. So I'll just skip through that. We are, so in relation to strategic cycle routes, we have been conducting some work with Sustrans and the cycling officers from the member representatives from the technical group. We have agreed a project brief, which we have circulated. We will be due to circulate shortly to senior officers for technical approvals. And we're also seeking ratification from the Department of Transport that meets and is in line with their policy, which is what they've outlined as part of our funding agreement, that we need to make sure that we align with the Department's transport strategy and that we conduct work that is not duplicative from a value for money perspective. So that piece of work is due to be procured shortly, subject to final approvals from the board and from the senior officers at the Department of Transport. That piece of work will be focusing on looking at cycling and active travel, is particularly in relation to the rise of use of e-bikes and e-scooters on a regional basis. So that hopefully should see you'll be giving an update on progress for that project in September's meeting. In relation to the strategic bus and coach strategy, we initially outlined a piece of work that stated that we would conduct a bus and coach strategy. Subsequently to that, we have the national bus and coach strategy has come out. We've had a discussion with technical officers, and what they recommended is that we remove the bus elements for the project because there's quite a lot of work doing on a local authority level, and we focus on coach aspects for that project. So again, I think that's one of the decisions we're looking for the board to agree with today. We are looking to kick off that project subject to approval from the board in October. So that's that particular project. In relation to rural mobility, this is where it hopefully should be a large project for us. It's got more funding than a lot of the other projects. There's about 100k sitting in that project. What we're looking to have been doing is we've been working with Dr. Claire Gregory for the Department of Transport to understand how she's progressing the National Rural Mobility Strategy, and we've been working closely with officers from the Peninsula STB to understand what work they're progressing. There is some more discussions that we need to have with the department and the Peninsula STB, and that is really to make sure that before we issue the brief for competition, that we make sure we articulate everything that we need to get in there, and we don't supersede or duplicate any work that's been conducted at a national level, and that we can make that a robust strategy that sort of fits in with the national approach. So that we are hoping to issue that finalised brief to senior officers and the department, hopefully this week / next week, James?
Yes, I can confirm it will be next week. We'll be sending the brief round. Okay,
so as long as we get that brief approved, we are looking to start that project potentially in September, as long as we can get the procurement through. So that's a very fast run through of the project that we're progressing. I think the key points to note on that is that our funding agreement with the department states that we need to make sure we are in line with the Department of Transport's national strategies, and that we have ongoing liaison with the Department of Transport policy leads, which we are conducting. And we're also conducting our due diligence to make sure that we include any member authorities' work that they've already undertaken, so that we don't duplicate effort.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Noel. That was really helpful again. I think particularly for people who haven't been as involved, to see all the projects that we've got that are in progress at the moment, the ones that where we are pending as well, when pending commissioning. Just before I bring you in, I can see Steve Reed's indicating what I was hoping to do is just to sort of name each section to go through and people to whack their hand up if it's the bit that they want to speak on, if that's all right. So Steve, could I ask you just to lower your hand for a second and then to put it up again as soon as we come to the item that we're talking about that you want to bring up. Thank you very much. So the strategic model, we're all happy on that one, and the STP, obviously we've heard all from Ben as we've been through. The carbon audit project we are about to get a discussion on. The next one is freight. The strategic rail programme, again, we're going to be getting a specific update on, and we discussed it extensively at the last meeting. Alternative fuels, again, we'll come to that in the recommendation as well. Strategic cycle routes. Okay, I'd just like to make one quick point on this, or one quick question. I think we have to accept two slightly conflicting directions of travel on this one, in that there is a very clear indication from government and indeed within a lot of our own local authorities that we wish to see cycling as promoted, and at the same time, as is indicated here, we're looking particularly at e-bikes and e-scooters, which will increase the range. But it will also necessarily, as far as our long-term strategic, as far as our long-distance strategic network, remain somewhat niche and weather dependent. So one says go out and splash a lot of money on it, and one says let's not go overboard on it. So can I sort of get some sort of idea about the extent of the activity that we're looking at, because we don't want to be left behind as far as potential funding for strategic cycle routes, but nor do we want to be putting eggs in one basket or to be pushed in this way if it means that we're going to be losing out elsewhere. So if I can just ask, first of all, for a comment on that from Nuala or from one of the officers, and then I can see that Sarah has indicated, and I can also see that there is another person, but it's not showing me who, so I might ask. I see it's James. Right, mine's slightly playing up as far as showing which participant it is. So if I can first of all ask Nuala whether you can answer that, or whether you'd like to nominate an officer to do so. After which
I shall nominate James, if that's okay, Councillor Green. Please,
so James, yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, for those who don't know, I'm James White. I'm one of the technical leads for the Western Gateway. I think with the cycling strategy piece of work, I think yes, it is a good point about we're weather dependent and potentially it's a niche. I suppose if we look to some of our bigger urban areas like Bristol and like Bath to a degree, we get good levels of cycling all year round despite the weather. Okay, I will accept that it's a different matter cycling across open countryside to cycling down urban streets. But I think what we have seen, a big trend we have seen in recent years, is that all year round element to cycling. I think with this piece of cycling work, it's potentially providing a unique angle for the Western Gateway. None of the other STBs are really looking at cycling or considering cycling in any detail, and there is the potential here to provide a network that really does link up main towns and villages with transport hubs. So it becomes part of a much longer journey, so you're able to cycle using your e-bike or e-scooter or ordinary cycle, able to get to a station that might be 5 or 10 miles away, and then make that longer distance journey. So I think there's hopefully a lot of potential in this work, but it does need to have a firm evidence base behind it, and that will be a key part of the brief to establish, well, where are the best links going to be, where is the most benefit going to be had.
Excellent, thank you very much. I mean, I think it is very clear First of all, I wasn't aware that that there are no other or very few STBs looking at this. It is very clear there is direction from government, and it is clear that there is potential for us to align ourselves with DFT and make a good move towards the decarbonisation and sustainable approach that we're after in adopting these, as long as we are looking at the up to an hour's journey, I think, by cycle. So we're looking either at a complete corridor approach or stuff that's sub 20-25 miles in the way that you're talking about, linking up villages, linking up towns, and being able to create hubs. That makes perfect sense to me. Thank you. I think the next one I've got is Sarah, please.
Hi, so I'm Councillor Sarah Warren. So I apologise I was late and I missed the pre-meet, but I'm the Deputy Leader at Bath and North East Somerset Council with responsibility for climate emergency and sustainable transport. And it was just to say that places like Bath, we have a large proportion of our workforce comes from outside of the city, in towns like Midsummer Norton and Radstock and Peacedown St John and Bradford on Avon and Corsham, and those are all distances that would be, you know, and our bus service is, our rural bus service, like probably everyone else's, is expensive and intermittent, and a lot of the old routes that used to exist don't exist anymore. So if we are to give people from those sort of places alternatives to the car for commuting, which is what we need to do, because aside from our climate emergency declaration, Bath has got significant air pollution problems as well, then it's very important that we give them options, because they live in a close enough range to be able to cycle, especially with electric bikes, even though it's hilly. They make it possible, and so I think it's vital that we have some infrastructure.
Absolutely, thank you very much. I think the question on this, I personally, I couldn't disagree with the word that you said there, Sarah. I think the question is how much of that is truly strategic as far as the gateway is concerned, because much of this would be handled within our own local authorities or occasionally pairs of local authorities. So I think my question to you, James, on that would be, how are we going to give put a strategic handle on this, which means that we will be able to bid for funds?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, Chair, and I think this is where the gateway can take that cross-border view and see above all the boundaries, and sometimes, mostly it will just be pairs of local authorities, I would agree, but sometimes it might be more than two authorities. So it's yes, what value, and it's something that's an important aspect to this work. What value can the gateway bring to this by taking that overall and strategic picture and pulling it all together into a cohesive network? Because hopefully there would be strength in speaking with one voice for the whole of the gateway area, and having sort of one funding bid if that opportunity to arises, rather than having sort of 9 separate or 4 or 5 separate different, not competing, but 4 or 5 separate bids.
Thank you very much. Sarah, is your hand still up, or is it a supplementary you'd want to go for?
Up anymore.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got both the Councillor Steves. I've also got David Carter and Colin Needus. David and Colin, do you need to come in on this part of it first of all? If I either do, please shout, and then I'll bring the Councillor Steves in afterwards.
So if you go for the members first, Mike.
I'm sorry?
So if you go for the members first and then...
Absolutely. Okay, so it's Councillor Steve Pearce, please, first of all.
Hi, thanks, Chair. I'm just looking for some comfort for myself and for the coach industry. The last 18 months of unpleasantness won't have done the coach industry a great deal of in the way of favours. I'm looking for some comfort that waiting until October won't jeopardise what is already perhaps a perilous state for them. October is going to be the end of probably a second not very good season for them.
Thanks, Steve. If it's all right, can we just do anything else on the cycling first, and then go on to the bus and coach, if that's okay? So we'll consider that question as asked for when we go on to the next section. If that, Stephen Reid.
Yeah,
Stephen.
thank you, Chair. Chair, I agree with what Sarah and James said a moment ago. I'll give you an example. The link between South Gloss and Baines at Keynsham is the proverbial missing link in terms of cycling. People from the eastern part of Bristol, South Gloucestershire area, who wish to work either in Keynsham or in Bath would need that missing link, because it would give them access to Keynsham Station. Keynsham Station then gives you access to the rest of the network. The question is whether or not that is strategic, or whether or not it is a pairing of authorities. I actually think it's both, because it is a missing link as part of that whole network. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think that's a case well made, Steve. Right, we've got a comment there from Alison, I think, just for the people who would like to pick that up in the comments bar. But then can I take Dave Carter, please?
Yeah, so I think just on behalf of my authority, I think picking out what Councillor Warren was saying, that one of the things I'd hope that the walking and cycling strategy at the STB level does is not about specifics, although we all use anecdotes to explain it. It's about the lack of, in effect, maybe cross-border planning, and that we as the STB are saying to the DFT and obviously to the public that this is what we want to plan for. The funding that delivers that can come through many sources, and I think there is far more flexibility in the way that, say, major roads funding can help deliver cycling and walking schemes as part of an overall proposal. So for me, it's really making sure the walking and cycling stream explains the problem we're trying to solve, which is particularly Baines, for example. Bath is close to the border of Wiltshire, so demonstrably we use the STB as a vehicle to work with Wiltshire Council to understand what we can do, particularly in sustainable transport links.
Thank you. I think more and more as people are speaking, we can see the advantage and how we might be able to present this as a strategic case. And thanks very much, Alice, as well for that helpful comment in the chat bar. Colin.
Yeah, David's picked up some of what I wanted to say, but just to add, I think the other thing to think about is just the economic value of long distance cycle routes. There's been a lot of work done, I think, by Sustrans, sort of researching, the value of long distance cycle routes and particularly attracting visitors. And I know actually there's a large number of people that do the sort of Land's End John O'Groats thing each year, certainly pre-COVID, and I think thinking about that long distance cycle route opportunity and how it might actually relate to tourism and leisure and visitor is an opportunity that we should look at as well as part of this work stream. I think nationally it's worth several hundreds of millions of pounds a year now in terms of value to the economy, and I think the Western Gateway, we've got a lot of very good assets, haven't we, that potentially we can attract some of that spending power into our area.
Thank you. And in a slightly different life, I believe that there is going to be some focus on this through destination management organisations. So we may find that there's a strategic possibility coming up as that review comes forward over the next few months. So thank you for that. I haven't seen any more hands up on cycling. So Steve Pearce made the point on the timings and whether October is a suitable timing, which isn't going to leave the coach companies without support for long enough, given how things have been going. Is there an officer who would like to respond on that, please?
I'll come in and I'd ask James for support, if that's all right, Councillor Green. Really, the suggestion behind pushing it towards October is really just to maximise officer time. At the moment, a lot of your officers are focusing on returns that are due to the DFT shortly in October. And they will be the same officers who we need to engage and work with in relation to coach. So it was in effect to prioritise the work that your officers are already doing to respond to the Department of Transport's bus strategy. So that's primarily the reason behind it, because I just wanted to be pragmatic and realistic about what we can achieve. But we definitely agree with the councillor that coach is a valuable thing to progress. James, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add on that one.
No, you put it far better than I could. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that does make perfect sense. I know that in each of our local authorities, though, working on the national bus strategy and the enhanced partnerships, etc., is taking up a large amount of time, and there are obviously very strict deadlines on that. So I think the point is well made, though, that while we're concentrating on those, we can't afford to let coaches slip away. So let's make sure that we keep at least one eye on what's going on in the coach industries. So thank you. And the last item on this one before we go into the recommendations is rural mobility. You've already explained about the links in with some of the others on this, and I think that's well made. So if there are no further points on that, we have a number of recommendations which are being brought to us.
Mike, sorry, Mike, before you go on, very briefly on rural mobility, and I'm sure that we're going to get it. I could really do with a lot more detail in due course. If you could just move the slide up, one slide, please. You've got there next steps, review feedback from member technical officers. What do you actually mean by that? Thank you.
So all of your officers have technical officers from each authority that we use to validate and bounce ideas across and make sure that they're happy with the brief and that it doesn't supersede or contradict with your own organisation's work programmes. So that's who they are. In effect, you've got some of them on the team on the call right now. So Rob Murphy and Andrew Davies are examples. So we make sure that they understand what we're trying to do. They can comment on the brief. They can bring it back to their own organisations. It doesn't contradict what they do, so that we're all working together and we've got visibility of what each other are doing.
Thank you, Nuala. That makes sense. Okay, I'll take it up with officers. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And I think this is obviously one of the schemes that we've got pending commissioning. Yes. And as Noel said, it is something that we both links in with other elements of the or other schemes that we're involved in. But particularly we know that it's likely that this government is going to be putting forward further funding towards this, and we need to make sure that we are aligned with them and ready to go with our caps out to do so. So moving on to the recommendations, number one is that we note the update on delivery progress and overall programme, and I think we're happy to do that. Number two is that we agree to revise the scope of the bus and coach projects to focus on coach elements only following issue of the national bus strategy, and I think we've all seen within our local authorities what the national bus strategy is going to involve us in, and I think that part of it has indeed been taken away from the from urgent need for ourselves strategically, so that we can concentrate on coaches. If there's any dissent, please stick your hand up. Otherwise, I'll just assume that we're agreeing on these. Now, number three, the recommendation really is going to need to be changed. Because at the moment it says to agree to rephase the delivery of the alternative fuels project subject to issue of the Department for Transport's decarbonisation plan, which was actually issued last week, and the electric charging vehicle strategy, which we have not yet seen. So I wonder whether, if with the board's permission, we should first of all let's hang on to number three until we've gone through those two relevant items on the agenda, and then come back to it with slightly amended wording, if that's all right. Yeah. Slightly similarly for number four is to agree to revise the rail programme scope. That's the paper B that we've got coming up. And if that's all right, I think we should defer our decision on recommendation 4 until we've heard that paper. Yeah. Number 5 is Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Yeah, number 5 is the same situation again, which is the parking targets, which again we need to wait until we've looked at that paper. Number 6 is to ratify the request to work jointly with the Peninsular Subnational Transport Body to produce a joint freight strategy. I'm very happy to support that. Is anybody not happy to do so? I think the case has been well made. Yep. Number 7 is to agree to delegate any amendments to scope to the senior officers group based on the outcomes of discussions with national STB group and following the publication for the DFT's decarbonisation, electric vehicles and rural mobility strategies. I would like to propose a small amendment to this. I think it is really important that within this this group that members are seen to be front and centre on it, and for that reason I would like to propose that this should be amended to read in consultation with the chair and vice chair who will be acting on behalf of the body. Are people happy to accept that amendment, please? Yeah, I see, not seeing any dissent. So with that amendment, I think we'd be happy to take that recommendation. And the next two await your words again, I think, Nuala, before we move on to recommendations 8 and 9. So if that's okay, I'll ask Nuala to take us through the financial update.
Okay, no problem. So just to give you a very quick overview, because I think we're conscious of time. So in relation to the STB's financial position, we've received a grant for 2021 of 425k, which we are in the progress of spending. We are pending receipt of elements of the grant for this financial year. What the DFT have set out is that they want us to seek drawdown on a project by project basis or in tranches, and that's to make sure that they are happy with what we're spending the money on. So we've requested a drawdown of 262.5k. That's to progress the projects that some of the projects that we've listed below that we're ready to procure. In relation to the other funding sources, we get funding from local authority income. We've had most of that received in. We're still, I think, pending possibly 1 or 2 payments. We also had a slight underspend from last financial year, which we're carrying forward. So that's just an overview of the income. In relation to the projects, just for your benefit, we've split it out into projects that are spending on against the 425k. So which are progressing to plan. We're not worried about any budget overspends in relation to that. What we're going to maintain is some risk provision in relation to the STB. So that's what that underspend of 25k is, just to make sure that if any amendments to scope or any extra meetings or reporting that we need to do, we'll keep that in hand. In relation to the freight project, we had originally set out a budget of 60k. Following negotiations with the Peninsula and discussions with David Elvey from the Department of Transport, what we suggested is we increase the budget for the freight project to 72.5k, and we use some of the money from the alternative fuels at present so we remove the money basically from alternative fuels into freight just for now. What we are likely to have is an underspend in the STP, so it'll work out in the mix, as they say. So I'm not particularly worried that we won't have enough money for alternative fuels. I'm just being overly cautious with spend. That is subject, obviously, to the board being happy and is subject to the DFT giving the final nod on that one. In relation to the rail, so the relation to the 21-22 projects, James will bring you through paper B and what we would like to spend the money on. As we outlined earlier, the STP phase 2 technical assessment, we are looking to procure that. I'm progressing that procurement now, so we should have it ready well in time for kick-off of that particular work package in December. Strategic cycle, we've just discussed, as well as both bus and coach, and rural mobility is a 100k budget sitting there ready for mini competition. in relation to the carbon audit, you'll see there's two lines, one line for the carbon audit at the top. There was 20k funding we spent from the DFT's money, and the remainder of the money for the project we spent using the STB funds. That's why it's on two particular lines. So just in short, we've got a slight underspend that we're forecasting, but I'm sure as we procure projects, we'll be able to determine a more scientific position on that one, but we're solvent from an STB perspective.
Right, thank you. Two quick questions from me. The first, as you said, looking to take money from the alternative fuels, which I can understand, and certainly as we go through, we can see that there is a need to be pulling back a little bit time-wise on that. Although I think I would expect that we would certainly catch up with this in future years, and because this is something which is going to be vital to us as a strategic transport body. However, on the table itself, unless I got something wrong, it looks as though the alternative fuels is still showing an 80,000 budget and an 80,000 forecast. So I can't see why taking the money out of that.
Well, so I wanted permission from the board before adjusting it, to be honest with you. That's the only reason for the leaving it as it is. Okay. And we also need DFT, I think. Sorry.
Right. Thank you. I think I'm there on that one. And the other question is the local authority income, where I think it's 20,000 each authority puts in, and it looks as though maybe are three authorities a bit shy of this year.
Nothing ever happens precisely when you want it to, but every confidence. We've never had any issues in the past.
Okay, we won't name and shame, but if we could ask each local authority to make sure that they put their money in, then at least it's in the bin, and we know that it's going to be there to continue our work programme. If we could ask on that. Are there any other questions on the finance? Otherwise, we can note the financial updates that have been given to us there. Right, sorry, Alice Jennings, I couldn't understand quite what you mean on that one on the officer group.
Oh, apologies, that was just in relation to our contribution.
Okay, thanks ever so much.
Sorry, just to let you know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alice.
So will the board, I guess, is happy to note the financial update. Thank you. Noala, the last element in your report on this paper is on the forward work programme. Now, I have to say, this is a chunk of work. We're a bit short of time, and I have to say, I think that particularly for newer members, we actually need a bit more time to be going through this, rather than to be sort of rushed in at the end of an agenda item, because it is important, as you say, that we look at the 3-year plan. Yes, it has been developed over the last couple of years, and probably makes sense exactly as it is. But I think for real member contribution, we really need to take this away and have a look at it, possibly with a slightly expanded paper to be sent to each of the members of the board. Don't know whether other members of the board have similar feelings, different feelings. Or Noala, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would definitely welcome that. What we're doing is just to prompt and poke debate. What we really need is councillors' input into what they actually want us to do, and the council should be driving our work programme, frankly. So we really do need inputs about what you think we should be doing and what would benefit and be value for public money, because what we don't want to do is spend money twice with the same consultants, or spend money that contradicts what we're doing at a national level. So 100% very happy to get input.
Thank you. So I'll bring in Councillor Rigby in a sec, but certainly my proposal would be that this ask that over the next month or so, members get a little bit more of a briefing on this in writing that they can discuss with their officers, and then that we bring this back into. Thank you, Alice. That we then bring this back to the next board meeting. Councillor Rigby.
You more or less took the words out of my mouth. It's hard to know whether it's because I'm new to this that I'm struggling to understand exactly how everything fits together, or if in fact it is quite difficult to understand how everything fits together. And I absolutely can say without fear of contradiction that I would appreciate a briefing a lot further in advance, so I can sit and have proper conversations with my cabinet colleagues as well as the officers, so that I feel I can add value when I attend the meeting, rather than at the moment just feel slightly bewildered by it all.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Amanda. And I think when we come to AOB, we're also going to be discussing about production of papers, etc. So hopefully that will aid what you're saying there, with which I have absolute sympathy. So thank you. In that case, Nuala, thanks ever so much. And with that action note, could we take that one away then, please, and get something to members over the next month? Fantastic. Right, so if we now move on to the two carbon papers, or decarbonisation papers. James, is it best that you start with the publication of the government's decarb transport plan, and then we go straight on from there into Rob and the presentation on our carbon audit?
Yes, Chair.
Thanks.
I've just got a couple of slides.
Thank you.
Trying to find them. No, wrong one. Apologies for that. So they were there a moment ago and they disappeared. Right. Hopefully this is now loading up on your screen. Yep. That's doing something rather strange on my screen. Can everyone see that properly?
Yes. James, just come up. Thank you.
Right. I might just try that again. Apologies.
For I have it handy.
It's there, James. It's there.
Oh, and that's now gone. Nuala, have you got the slides handy?
Yeah, everybody can see the slides, James, but I do have them handy if you need help.
If you could load them up, I've lost them from my screen now with technology. Whilst Nuala brings those up, yes, I think we all know that the government's decarbonising transport plan came out last week. It had been long awaited. It had been promised way back in December last year, but it is finally out. It is a long document. There's 220 plus pages to it, so there's an awful lot to have to wade through, and I think as officers we haven't had much of a chance yet to wade through all of that detail. So the slides are really just to highlight. And yeah, sorry, Nuala, were you able to load the two slides up?
Yes.
I can't see them. I don't think other people can see them.
I don't think we can see the slides at the moment, but I would suggest again, just given that even though I'm trying to rush through things, I think we are still a little bit behind on time. So maybe if you could speak it through, James, and if Nuala is able to get the able to get the slides up while we do so, then that would be great.
I will. Essentially, there's three key priorities in the document, and no surprises really. They're about accelerating modal shift to public and active transport, decarbonisation of road vehicles, and decarbonising how we get our goods. I think that third one is actually really quite key, and it reflects the work we're doing on the freight strategy and on alternative fuels. So actually, whilst yes, it's a lot about getting people to cycle and walk and use electric vehicles, freight is actually at the heart of all of our transport networks and everything that we do. There's a couple of key headline targets which you probably heard on the news coverage. There'll be no more diesel-only trains running from 2040, and the whole of the rail network will be decarbonised by 2030. 2050 rather, it'll be net zero, so electrification and hybrid trains. For petrol and diesel cars, the sale of petrol and diesel cars and vans will end by 2030, and the sale of HGVs by 2040. So everyone will have to move over to alternative fuels by that time. And by 2035, all new cars and vans must be 100% zero emission at the tailpipe. So some quite challenging targets, but a very clear sense of direction. In terms of roles, the document does set out that there is a role for strategic transport bodies. They have a role in supporting decarbonisation and joining up. They refer to local plans. I think they mean local transport plans. Joining up local transport plans across a wider geography and bringing with it, as we know, economies of scale and assure there's that coherence across boundaries. So one decarbonisation plan for the whole of the Western Gateway area. There's going to be a revised role for local transport plans. There's still a statutory requirement for local transport plans, but they have rather slipped down the agenda for some authorities. So a new role for them with quantified action plans in place. And it looks like that will then be linked back to funding from the government to deliver decarbonisation. So you have a local transport plan which sets out a decarbonisation agenda, and funding might be dependent on how well you do in delivering that decarbonisation agenda. Not too dissimilar to how it used to be about 20 years ago with local transport plans, where funding was related to meeting targets. And to help local authorities, there will be a new toolkit that's coming out later on this year. And in terms of policy appraisal, the current value attached to carbon is going to be revised. So I think for major schemes, this is going to mean a much higher value placed on carbon reduction when doing an assessment to see if there's a business case for a major transport scheme. Just very quickly, a few other key points. Roads are still there, and it does include a mention about high investment in roads will need to remain to ensure the functioning of the nation and to reduce congestion, it being a major source of carbon. Quite a controversial element around a jet zero strategy, including getting domestic aviation to be net zero by 2040. A similar commitment for the UK domestic maritime sector to be net zero as well. And then just one final point I'd like to flag up, and this is buried quite deep in the document, and I think this is why we need to go through it in a lot more detail. But there is a suggestion that consolidation centres, which is where one lorry loads onto a smaller lorry, could become compulsory. So as to ensure that the majority of urban deliveries are consolidated and transferred to zero emissions for that last mile. And that could actually, whilst it's tucked away, that could change the whole way that our towns and cities operate. So I think it's just one point just to flag up, and it just shows that there's an awful lot in the decarbonisation plan. So that has been a very swift run through. As I say, it's 220 pages, but it's just a few selected highlights of what's in there.
Thank you very much. And actually, I think it is extremely welcome. I think in line with pretty much all of our authorities here that have declared a climate and ecological emergency, to hear that the decarbonisation plans from government are very much aligned with our own. So I am looking forward to us to be able to align with this very well indeed. So thank you very much. If it's okay, I'd like to go straight on to Rob and the next item on here, which is item 8 on the agenda, because it's so well aligned with this. So Rob Murphy, please. You're muted at the moment, Rob. Are you having difficulty unmuting?
I am.
Oh no, I could actually hear you there.
Could you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my mic is showing as crossed out.
Yeah.
Okay. I can share my screen. I hope that will work. Apologies, I appear to having some laptop problems.
Your picture is also frozen, Rob, at the moment.
I've got it handy, Rob, if you want me to share if you've got technical difficulties, although I can't promise anything at the moment.
Yes, if you could, Nuala, that'd be grateful.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you. Again, if you'd like to start us off while the slides go out, there we go. Thanks, Rob.
Okay.
I don't think your computer likes the heat, Rob.
Rob, can you hear us now?
Just in the interest of time, Councillor Green, I don't know, James, if you'd feel comfortable starting us off. A little bit unfair.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah, I can step in. Rob's very much the better person to be talking about this, but yes, I can cover for Rob, and he can take over once his mic works.
James, I'm back here.
Are you back? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I hope you'll be okay now. So I'm going to present really on the work we're doing on the carbon baselining work, and to give also some indications of the work we're seeking to progress on the forecasting work. So the brief for the carbon baseline, its purpose was to inform the strategic transport plan, tying in with what James said previously, but also what Ben said earlier about the corridors and the scenario testing. But importantly also, we're making the tool that we're developing available also to help our constituent authorities undertake work for their local transport plan. So I'm sure that'll be helpful for all of us. So the brief requirements were broadly threefold. Firstly, to assess what available and relevant methodologies are already out there. So that might be at the national level from, for example, the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, or the scatter tool that is quite commonplace, but also what other STBs are using, Midlands Connect, for example. The second requirement really was to have a look at what carbon baseline work was being done by our constituent authorities, but also Highways England Network Rail. And then thirdly, based on those two elements, really, to come up with a recommended methodology to provide our carbon baseline. So WSP were appointed in March 2021. They've undertaken both the first part and the second part. I mean, broadly, a lot of what our constituent authorities have been doing in terms of baselining has been utilising top-down approaches from a national basis. So the work that you can, and the information and data you can get in terms of carbon from Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and also using the scatter tool. Interestingly, Highways England, I think, is progressing work that's going to be along the same basis as I will outline here, which is interesting. And Network Rail, they've got their various processes in play as well. So next slide, please. So the methodology that we're progressing is really a bottom-up approach. It's a detailed, granular approach, really. And the reason for looking at that and adopting that approach is because we feel it won't restrict us when we go forward into investigating and in terms of forecasting, but also testing things in terms of scenarios, etc. That by having a lot of information, we can what's called dice and slice the information. So the diagram on the right is trying to depict the level of information we're seeking. So it's at STB area, but also for local authority areas as well. It's for a number of modes, obviously the car, but HGVs, bus, coaches, rail. And it's a number of scales really in terms of the route length, the time period, trip distribution, journey purpose, journey length, etc. So it's quite granular in nature. The baseline, as you might imagine, we're taking is 2019, obviously pre-COVID. And the spreadsheet tool is going to be based on Excel, have a high level, easy to use or reasonably easy to use dashboard. As I said before, the data is available both at the STB level and for our individual local authority areas. The tool will be transparent, so you can see the data where it comes from and the calculation sheet. So hopefully be able to understand the outputs. And we're going to have the tables that are going to be based on this bottom-up granular approach. We're also going to have something which aligns those results to the national base, the business, energy, industrial strategy departments outputs as well, because that might be important for some of our local areas and also where we compare with those results. Next slide, please. So as you might imagine, from a rather granular approach, detailed approach, there's quite a lot of inputs, evidence sources going into the tool. So that covers really the traffic models that most, if not all, the local authorities have got in the area. So we're utilising those. It's utilising information from the DFT, but also looking at information that relates to bus and coach and rail passengers, utilising their respective modelling data sources, TRAC and Moira. But also then going to look at emissions data and alternative fuel assumptions, things which nationally from the DFT or the Office of Road and Rail would then provide us with some assumptions in terms of looking at what the fleet competition of those and outputs would be. So that's being gathered at the moment, all that information going into the tool really. Next slide, please. So the baseline tool is currently being built during this month. A trial should be then available in August, and ultimately following that review trial period, WSP will finalise the tool and produce an associate report outlining the methodology and how the tool was built and how to use it, etc. And that will be available in early September. I thought I should also just highlight the next stage really is the forecasting tool really. And that's a brief that's been developed by the Combined Authority, but alongside the STB as well. So it will cover both the Combined Authority area and also the STB area. And it will have a forecast end of year date of 2050, plus 1 or 2 intermediate years as well. So it will use similar evidence sources to the baseline tool, and it will be based on a similar approach, namely that spreadsheet tool really as well. I think importantly, there will be sensitivity levers within the tool. And what are these? These are aimed really at allowing us to alter some assumptions and measures really to see what the outputs will be in terms of carbon emissions. So I think that would be, as Ben said earlier, important in relation to the scenario testing that we might undertake. So for example, you could vary the percentage of EVs in the fleet, or the percentages of people who work from home, particularly important given a post-COVID world, and change in population development growth, trips per person. Those levers are currently being established through the brief process that we're currently undertaking. So it would be important to align those to some degree with the scenario testing process as outlined earlier. So as I said, that brief is currently being developed and a proposal expected back from WSP. And ultimately, we're seeking to complete that forecasting work in early autumn. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's a really plain way of putting a really clear way of putting a complex model into a form that we can understand it as mere members. So thank you for that. I'm a bit conscious of time. I think it's been really well explained by both of the officers here, both the national and the national picture and how it is working for us and how we're going to be able to align with it. So if it's all right with members to move straight on to the relevant recommendation on it. Thank you, Ian. We have a recommendation which needs to be slightly rephrased, but I think once it is, it's going to make perfect sense. Nora, do you have a reword for us on this one for recommendation 3? No? Okay, because what we've got at the moment, it's that we agree to rephase the delivery of the alternative fuels project. Obviously, we've already done so as far as the budget is concerned. We've given the authority to that. But I think it's got to be following the issue of the Department for Transport's decarbonisation plan and subject to issue of the electric charging vehicle strategy. Is that okay with everyone? Again, I see no dissent. So again, thank you very much for that, and we'll go forward with that recommendation then and approve that. Yeah. if we can now then go on to the rail strategy and paper B. Again, I'm conscious that we are a little bit behind time, so if we can concentrate on the if we can concentrate particularly on the third of those 4 items that I know that we need to discuss. Okay, so if you can take it away on the rail item, please.
Yes, Chair. It's me again, James. Yeah, I'll be very brief on the first and second and fourth items on the rail update. Just really to flag up on the first part of the rail update is about the William Shapps plan for rail and the proposals to create a new Great British Railways body, a national body with regional divisions, and there's a potential role there for the STB to play in that. So there's a recommendation there around asking the Rail Officer Group, which draws on officers from all of the authorities, to explore options for future STB involvement. The second part of the plan is about reallocating funding away from the proposed station audit. That was agreed back in at the March board meeting, but the William Shapps plan for rail does include the commitment to a national accessibility strategy and a national audit, which supersedes what we would have done with the Western Gateway. So the proposal is to reallocate the funding for this financial year towards taking forward the outputs that are coming out of the various Network Rail strategic corridor studies. And following on this item, we do have Network Rail talking about the Bristol to Exeter, Bristol to Birmingham corridors. There's some very exciting outputs coming out of both of those studies in terms of enhanced services. And there's also a study underway at the moment for Dorset. There's existing West of England mainline study, which reported I think last year, and then there's an emerging Southwest mainline one as well. And just about to start is one for the Greater Bristol, the wider Greater Bristol travel to work area too. So the proposal is just to reallocate this year's funding towards starting some of the more detailed feasibility work for those studies. The fourth item, very quickly, East West Rail have approached the Western Gateway to join their consortium. This is about providing links from Bristol to Oxford and the South Coast to Oxford, and linking in with their proposals to reopen the rail links between Oxford and Cambridge and potentially Ipswich and Norwich, creating a whole new sort of east to west mainline all across, connecting all these high-tech centres like Bristol and Bath and Swindon, Didcot and Milton Keynes and Cambridge. So the main item, so it's taken me a little bit longer than I expected to get to it, you want to talk about is the rail strategy and what it says about car parking. The rail strategy has a target for increasing the number of car parking spaces, and it took a rather one-size-fits-all approach in applying a formula, which leads to having to provide or committing to provide large numbers of spaces at some stations where it really wouldn't be appropriate. I will just give you two small examples of this. One is Folkestone Station, which using the formula suggests it needs 206 spaces. There are currently no spaces at Folkestone. It's in the heart of a suburban area. Is it appropriate to provide car parking when the majority of passengers can cycle or walk? And at the other extreme end, there's Bath Spa Station, obviously a very, very busy station, where using this formula suggested you would need an extra 3,900 parking spaces. Clearly undeliverable and very much against all the creating a modal shift and reducing carbon emissions agenda. So the proposal in the report is to reword the car parking policy with a caveat around that there are still going to be some stations at key locations which do act as parkway type stations or as regional hubs, which serve a much wider area and provide longer distance train services. But there's still going to be a case for increasing parking at certain locations. But generally, with most of our stations, it's probably inappropriate to have a blanket increase in the number of spaces. So the recommendation is around changing the policy in the rail strategy. So apologies, Chair, that has been a real canter through what's in the rail update report, but I hope that did all make sense.
It certainly makes a great deal of sense to me, and I think that the key question on this is whether we want to continue with the parking strategy that we have at the moment. And I think certainly the Bath example that you've given there shows that it really makes very little sense to do so. We need, to my mind, to recognise that there will be times that people will want to drive to the station, and what we certainly wouldn't want to do is, if they are if their choice is to drive a mile to the station, get on the train for 50 miles, get on the train to come back for 50 miles, and then to drive the mile home, if the choice is between that and driving 51 whole miles each way, we certainly would prefer to ensure that they have they do the former. So I do think it's a case of ensuring we have horses for courses, recognising that what we have at the moment is not suitable, and agreeing at this point to remove that, but to expect officers to come back with an alternative over the next meeting or two, so that we can put something more meaningful into our rail strategy and not leave it blank. I think pretty much what you were saying there, James, on the last one, that there is a need to increase parking in some cases. There may also be the opportunity to reduce parking in some cases, but I think this needs quite a bit of extra work done, and maybe where we maybe we were too ambitious in the way that we put this in before. So, Councillor Steve Reid, please.
Yeah, James and Chair, I agree with the principles that you are referring to and what we are referring to. What I would like to see is more about a case-by-case approach. I have concerns about using the phrase regional hubs and parkway type places in the same sentence. I'll give you an example. Always easier with an example. Charfield Station, which should be upgraded in the next so many years, would not be classed as a regional hub. It's currently a sort of a medium-sized town, but there will be, over the next 10-20 years, significant development in that area, and therefore it will become an important station. So I think we need to make sure we leave scope for a case-by-case approach. I agree with Mike. Yes, it is about the last mile, although I would say with e-scooters it might be the last 5 miles, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles, and we should be providing provision to park those scooters, e-bikes, whatever they may be. So all my plea would be is that when officers come back with appropriate words, they do use the phrase case by case as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And I think one of the main points that's been made there within what Steve just said is that there is an element here of getting the wording right. And I really don't think that we have at the moment on this one. The message is certainly there that we want to move towards a more sustainable method of transport across the gateway, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not, in some cases, car parking there to be able to make it more sustainable than it would be if people otherwise were to be driving the full way. So can we have a bit of a work on that and hopefully bring it back in to another meeting on that one? Again, it can be distributed by email. I'd be very happy to see the replacement like that, and then we can just formally approve a change if we've all had that discussion beforehand. So, Jake, thank you very much. Hands have gone down from James and David Carter. Is that fine to move on from there? If it is, then I would be happy to see the recommendations going through as to agree to revise the parking targets in the rail strategy, subject to return to this board for with the correct wording, and to where's the other one, and to agree to revise the rail programme scope according to the issue of the William Shapps plan, following that, the plan for rail. Yeah, if members are content with that, then we can take those recommendations through. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it, and thank you for being so brief. So the next, the last substantial item that we have is the Network Rail update from, is it Jonathan, is it? Sorry, I don't have that up.
Hello there, yes, John Lovett here from Network Rail.
Yes, thank you. Jonathan, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then help us out on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I certainly will. John Lovett, Network Rail, Western Route Strategic Planning, and my team has led the production of the 2 corridor studies. And Nuala, I'm wondering if you'll be able to share the presentation, or would you prefer if I was to do that?
I've got it.
Okay, I think it's coming.
Apologies, just while you're coming in, Nuala's got the there was the I had forgotten on this. I'm terribly sorry because it wasn't. I went back to the main paper A, but there is a further recommendation contained within that paper B to agree to delegate to officers to work closely with EWRC on developing the business case for Bristol to Oxford and Oxford to Southampton services, to confirm our membership of EWRC, which it points out in the written report is without cost to ourselves, and to agree to the Western Gateway logo being added to the EWRC prospectus. And I hope members will be happy to agree that recommendation. Thank you. Sorry, Jonathan, sorry to interrupt you. We just needed to get that done before going on. So I will leave it to you to go on from here, which slightly overlaps as well.
Okay, thank you. So yes, thanks indeed for the opportunity to present the findings today of our 2 corridor strategic studies, referring to Bristol to Exeter and Bristol to Birmingham. And indeed, this refers and is actually very well placed to help inform Western Gateway's strategic corridor from the Midlands to the southwest. And one hopes that the provision of this information will therefore be a really strong evidence base as you start to develop the recommendations for that strategic corridor. So again, conscious of time, so there's quite a lot of detail in this pack. So it may well be that either it has been circulated or it could be straight after, and therefore people will be able to understand the detail. But on that basis, I'll kind of skim through with the slides where I can. And this one explains a bit of the context. So both studies commenced in spring 2020, and they've now been completed following the release of the final reports. A key point throughout has been the strong stakeholder engagement, which has enabled the study findings to be endorsed. And indeed, it's good to see a number of officers from Western Gateway on the call today who've been closely involved in developing the studies in the last couple of years. So this presentation runs through the study context, the findings for each of Bristol to Birmingham and Bristol to Exeter, recommendations for freight, recommendations beyond the infrastructure, which includes train services and other related themes such as first and last mile, the future plans for developing the study outputs, and then the immediate next steps. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, study context. Both studies had a similar headline question, which was around how can rail best support sustainable economic and housing growth between Bristol and Birmingham and Bristol and Exeter. And the reports are intended to inform decisions by strategic planners and funders around further development of services to 2030 and beyond. As mentioned before, they've been developed very strongly in alignment with the strategic priorities and objectives of all the relevant STBs, So not just Western Gateway, but also Midlands Connect and Peninsula Transport. Common transport challenges that we've noted there include the need to accommodate a variety of different service types, including high-speed, interregional and local services, as well as the freight, and a theme around connectivity challenges, where we have a number of major centres such as Worcester, Gloucester and Weston, which are bypassed by the main lines, which gives extra challenges for properly servicing those major centres. Next one, please. So considering Bristol to Birmingham first, some of the key findings are presented in this slide. So we know that significant housing and employment growth is proposed in the corridor and indeed committed. This is likely to exacerbate existing connectivity shortfalls, and despite committed rail improvements, is actually likely to create new ones as well. This would restrict the role of rail and its ability to support growth, and would contribute to existing network constraints that we have. So therefore, passenger service improvements are required to address the current and emerging connectivity shortfalls. Some of the key locational priority areas for improved connectivity are Worcester stations, Gloucester, Ashchurch, Cam Dursley and Yate. These are high growth areas with existing connectivity issues, as reflected through the market demand analysis that we've carried out for the studies. Also between Gloucestershire and Worcestershire. For Gloucestershire into Bristol, and that's a particularly relevant one for Western Gateway and West of England Combined Authority. Gloucestershire stations to Bristol, as I say, also Stroud and Stonehouse on the South Cots line into Gloucester and Cheltenham, and also emerging from Birmingham between Worcester and the cross city lines, including Bromsgrove and Longbridge. And a note there's a need to accommodate growth in rail freight as well, which has been a key theme explored through the studies. Next one, please. Okay, so in terms of recommendations, we have a number of principal features which include the need to amend existing and proposed interregional services to deliver improved connectivity while also retaining attractive journey times. So the way forward agreed for both studies really was to try and incorporate limited additional stops where merited by particular strategic demand. And in Bristol to Birmingham, that refers to locations such as Ashchurch and Worcester Parkway. And coming up shortly, you'll see the same approach for Bridgewater between Bristol and Exeter. Also, a need to significantly improve local services, including a metro-style frequency of up to 4 trains an hour eventually between Gloucester and Bristol. Additional service provision by Midland Rail Hub proposals, so that's Cardiff to Birmingham, including provision of additional services via Gloucester and Lydney to avoid any additional strain on the Bristol Parkway line as well. And then finally, additional services for Cheltenham Spa as a key point at the heart of the network. Next one, please. So in terms of infrastructure improvements, a couple of diagrams shown there on the right regarding potential new bay platform for Cheltenham, and also a number of improvements between Parkway and Westerly. So very quickly from north to south, Worcestershire, 2 goods loop lengthenings, Cheltenham Spa, as I say, a potential new bay platform. Gloucester, there's a number of improvements possible based on existing but underused infrastructure. Gloucester to Westerly, the need to provide new capacity for additional passenger trains, particularly to pass each other. And finally, which is the big one really for any future investment, is Westerly to Stoke Gifford, which would be a significant challenge that we don't underestimate how to deliver that one. Next one, please. Bristol to Exeter, so a phased approach here in 3 phases, which would ultimately deliver a service pattern shown on the diagram on the right there. So delivering rail access improvements for Bristol and Exeter, additional longer distance journeys stopping in those locations. Additionally, between Greater Western-super-Mare and Bristol, that's obviously a key corridor for West of England Combined Authority and Western Gateway. So the opportunity to develop the Metro West proposals between those 2 key nodes. specifically in reference to North Somerset, an opportunity to upgrade and rebrand Worl as a Western Parkway type interchange station, which would both support major housing growth and also facilitate multimodal interchange, including as the nearest heavy rail hub really for Bristol Airport. We have reference there to Bridgewater and Gravity in North Somerset, which are the two key strategic employment-led growth opportunities. And then reference also to interregional connectivity, where railheads such as Taunton and Tiverton have a key role in servicing very wide hinterlands across the whole really of Devon, and that's reflected in protecting and enhancing the kind of longer distance services stopping in those locations. And then finally, we are going to welcome the new communities, really, Portishead, Wellington and Colompton, through different work streams, rejoining the network, including Wellington and Colompton, particularly through the Restoring Your Railway proposals, which are currently being progressed. Next one, please. Again, the briefest of canters through some of the infrastructure needs between Bristol and Exeter, and a couple of diagrams showing these on the right there. So signalling improvements across the whole route to reduce headways from 4 minutes to 3 minutes, simply to accommodate more services. Between Bedminster and Parsons Street, reinstating forward tracking on that key section of the route into Bristol. The Atton Loop, and also more importantly in the western area, a number of proposals to redouble the World Junction, which is a key bottleneck in this part of the world, redouble the line to Western, and include, as I mentioned before, a rebranded and upgraded Western Parkway station, additional bay platform at Western to accommodate the service uplift on this very key route between Western and Bristol, reconnecting the Gravity site to the main line, also opportunities in Taunton, Northern Fitzwarren area to promote links between West Somerset Railway and the main line network, and certainly more work needed in that area to define what those needs are. And then finally, Exeter St David's as a relative quick win, which is additional platform capacity, which could be realised through a bay platform extension there. Next one, please. Again, briefly, recommendations for freight. So both studies have highlighted real opportunities for freight growth, and through the course of the year-long work on the two studies, there was a very significant amount of promotion really from our stakeholders on the opportunities to support decarbonisation, particularly through encouraging modal shift, and that is translated in our report findings into eventually 2 trains per hour in each direction on the Birmingham corridor, 1 train per hour between Bristol and Taunton, which then increases to 2 per hour south of Taunton because you have the Berks and Hants line coming in as well. In terms of new markets opening up, so we have tremendous opportunities for new intermodal and express logistics type traffic in the southwest to complement the bulk materials traffic, which is currently the mainstay of the traffic types on this route. There's a need to review timetable planning rules to bring up to date in terms of what we could achieve with freight running times, which could release more capacity for passengers. We obviously make sure we won't neglect the opportunities for electrification and gauge enhancements that can go hand in hand with that. And in terms of key new locations there, all pointing to a new strategic freight interchange for the west of England in Avonmouth, and that potentially linking in with feeder services to the southwest, including Devon, Cornwall and Gravity. And finally, the express logistics opportunities, which refers potentially to bringing back infrastructure at stations to accommodate sort of express Amazon type deliveries, but also possibly using additional locations away from the stations that we have. Next one, please. So the recommendations didn't just refer to infrastructure and services. We also looked at, for example, accessibility, including the need to provide better early and late services provision, interchanges between services, so that refers to the ease of interchange across key stations, station accessibility, so this is about mobility impaired people being able to have better access to all the network. And then in terms of decarbonisation, we recommend the TD&S work is carried forward, and that refers to the regional decarbonisation strategy that we're developing in more detail to include the Birmingham-Bristol and Exeter corridor. And also linked to that, first and last mile, which refers to the whole journey being made by sustainable means, with rail being a key part of that. And that refers to, for example, multimodal interchange opportunities at stations. We mustn't forget some of the key resilience challenges that we have. So as we develop our package of schemes, we'll have full cognizance of, among other things, level crossing risk, which is a particularly sensitive point in locations such as Gloucester, where you have a level crossing right hard up against the station, and also flood risk, which has been a significant challenge across the network. We only have to look at recent events in Gloucestershire and across the Somerset levels, and indeed through the South Somerset lines, and then further south through the peninsula, what a challenge that is for the network currently. And the need to accommodate maintenance requirements, which will increase as we aim to run more services. Next one, please. So in terms of next steps, we have three ways identified in which we'll recommend that these are taken forward. So that's further development of recommended outcomes and supporting and influencing existing programmes and informing the future strategic rail planning work. This one includes Network Rail's own strategic planning, such as the Greater Bristol Strategic Study, which James mentioned just now, and also the regional decarbonisation strategy, which follows on neatly from the network-wide work Network Rail's already done. And finally, there's a note about further strategic development work by West of England and indeed Western Gateway, which will dovetail very well with Network Rail's plans as recommended in this study. Next one, please. So immediate next steps. We'll be producing short summary versions of each report, circulating both versions, that's the short and the long version, which is already available, and publish those on the Network Rail website. Certainly we'll be encouraging partners, including Western Gateway, to kind of absorb and build on the findings of those reports. There's an opportunity to inform time of development and existing programmes, including Midlands Rail Hub, which already has a well-developed programme of improving services southwest of Birmingham, so it'll dovetail very neatly into that. We need to clearly begin to further develop the cost and feasibility of key interventions, which is a process starting now, and then to develop potential business cases and work with funders to establish priorities for progression, including Western Gateway. And finally, just to make the point that actually since the presentation was prepared, we already have started to develop a package approach, which is one way that we could take forward the interventions highlighted in the report. So rather than develop them individually, there's a good opportunity to actually package them together, which gives economies and helps to reduce disruption as the schemes were to be built. And this is an approach we're developing, and we're already developing this jointly with Western Gateway and West of England, and we'll look to develop that joint approach. And as highlighted really throughout the rest of the presentations today, there's a very neat alignment between the findings of our corridor studies here and also the opportunity to help inform your the Western Gateway corridor study, particularly from Midlands down to the southwest. And that was a very quick and potentially rushed presentation, being cognizant of time. But like I say, I hope that either the pack has gone out or indeed it can straight after, and people will be able to have the opportunity to absorb more of the detail of the recommendations.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Very helpful and very comprehensive. Really appreciate that. Both Steves have got their hands up. We are already over time by a few minutes. I know some people have got to go. Is there anything that we may be able to do by email, or is it something that really needs to come forward at these points, Steves? Because I think there's an awful lot that was in there which are relevant to individual authorities, whereas obviously here we're looking particularly at the strategic throughout the situation across the whole gateway. But,
Steve, you first.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Fantastic presentation, full of, I've got to say, really good news. So thanks for that. I'm hugely uplifted. The electrification that you speak of the Exeter-Birmingham corridor, would that include into the ports? Because if we're going to electrify anything, surely we must electrify heavy freight.
That is a great question, which we'll be exploring in more detail, as I say, through the regional decarbonisation work, which is in progress, and also through the Greater Bristol study, which is starting up now. I'm personally very interested and keen in opportunities for freight development, and there are certainly other places around the network where electrification to support major freight growth to ports is happening. Avonmouth is a great example where we could extend this, and particularly the trunk routes into Avonmouth, as in the freight only route, is a good candidate for electrification. We still have to bear in mind that there's a need to kind of change the traction technology potentially for the last mile into the terminals themselves, but even that is something that's being overcome in other locations. So there's one particular design of locomotive now that's already running on the network, which can actually be powered by overhead electricity right up to within a mile of a port, and then basically the pantograph comes down and the diesel engine takes over for the last mile delivery to and from the port itself. So that technology is already out there, and it means that we could indeed look to electrify particularly the trunk routes, like I say, into Portbury and Avonmouth. Then there's another point about how that interfaces with the passenger service uplift, including Metro West. But yeah, certainly I'm very keen to explore those opportunities through the upcoming work.
Thanks very much, Jonathan.
I'm really pleased to hear that. Thanks for that.
And I think that fits clearly with what we're talking about with freight being such an important element in our decarbonisation programme, as we were discussing.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Steve Reed.
Yeah, Jonathan, great presentation. For all of this to work, one of the key pinch points, which you do have listed, is Westerly Junction. We've been talking about Westerly Junction forever. We really need to get it resolved. I know it's on your list. Be good to see a timescale at some point associated with that one. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Steve. I will leave Jonathan to get back to you outside the meeting on that one, but I think you know the request. So, Jonathan, thank you ever so much. Before we move on to any other business, I've got a couple of items on that. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were actually some other recommendations on the rail paper itself that we didn't get to. So I'm just going to read them through and hope that they are agreed. To delegate to the rail officer group to explore options for the STB to take a greater role in the area's rail app network, which I think fits in with the work with Peninsula, etc., and I think is welcome. The second is to agree to reallocate the £65,000 rail strategy funding for 2021 to 2022 to taking forward the outputs from Network Rail strategic corridor studies with delegation to the senior officer group, and I'd like to insert the words in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of the STB to confirm the programme. And we've already discussed the agreed to delete the car parking at stations target and revising the revise, but we're not happy to use the supporting text that was included in Appendix 2, so that would come back. So apologies for missing out those recommendations, but if with those changes we can agree those, please. Great. In that case, we'll go on to AOB. And there's a couple of little housekeeping things and maybe others that I just would like to bring up, if I may, please. The first is to, on behalf of all of the members of the board that were here previously, I'd like to ask that we write to our previous chair, Bridget West, to say thank you for all the work that she has done in her time as chairman here. She was an outstanding chairman. I think kept us really focused and working together. So is that okay with everyone that we write on behalf of the board, please? Thank you. The second is just really around the meetings themselves. We've been, I think we try to get through this pretty speedily, but we still managed to overrun. And I think that we maybe at the moment we should just keep to exactly the schedule that we have for meetings, but note that we may have to plug an extra one in at some stage to be able to get through the meetings. We don't really want them extending much beyond the 2 hours they do at the moment, so I hope that's okay. The next one is there's on the 22nd of September, and there's been a request to move that to the morning. I hope that's all right with people. I'm not sure whose behalf that was, but the request is there, and I hope that is okay with everyone, that we should move that to the morning. And while we're on the subject of meetings, I wonder whether this has worked well, to this one particularly, I think, to have it virtually, but we also know that there are some benefits with having people together around a table when we're going to be working so collaboratively as we go forward. So I do wonder whether maybe something like the December meeting or the March meeting, something like that, we should try to hold it in person if possible. So maybe at least once a year, possibly twice a year, to have meetings where we can physically see each other and look each other in the eyes. Would people be okay with that? Yeah, great. Also on the subject of meetings, I think it seems really important that we get the opportunity to see most of these items in better time. And I understand the extra strain that it puts on the officers, but hopefully it'll be a case of just getting into the cycle. We recognise that there will be necessarily some updates that come forward at the last minute, but with the board's permission, I would like to propose that the norm is that we receive the papers, members receive the papers 2 weeks in advance of the meeting date, which will give us the opportunity to discuss with each other, to discuss with officers, and I think to be better prepared. And I can see a few nods coming through. So again, if people are content with that, that would be what we require, please, in the future. And I think I would also, although it slightly means that we don't get the surprise element, I would ask that any presentations, even if we can't have them 2 weeks in advance, but if we can have the slides even 3 or 4 days in advance, I think it will allow us to pinpoint where our questions are likely to come. So we've had some excellent presentations. It would have been great if we were able to go forward and beforehand and say, you know what, actually I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, and we can inform each other that we want to do so. So if we could just put that in as a request. And the last thing that I would like to suggest is, as we've seen in this meeting, it is a very broad subject of transport that we have, and there are a lot of elements in it, and none of us is going to be an expert in everything. But I do think that it would be useful for board members, for elected members, to be able to dive a bit deeper into some of this, particularly where we have particular interest or understanding of a section of it. And so this is an idea I'd like to put forward. We certainly don't need to decide it now, but maybe if we could at the next election. I didn't mean that at all. The next meeting. Certainly putting that one the wrong way around, talking to elected members. But we have, as we've been going through the programme, particularly the ones that are pending commissioning, there are a number of areas that Nuala went through: freight, rail, alternative fuels, strategic cycling routes, the strategic, what was bus and coach strategy, we're now talking probably a coach strategy, rural mobility, and there will be others as we come forward. And I wonder what other board members would think about whether we ask for volunteers for one board member to act as a lead, effectively, to be working with the officers, so that when it comes forward to these meetings, that at least one member or one member and myself have been able to have pre-sight of the papers and help them develop in a way that that will help us as we go forward, and ensure that it is the elected members who have the input that I think that our residents should be expecting us to have. I see some thumbs going up there, and that's great. In that case, can we won't decide that now, but we'll have it as an item on the next meeting. And if anyone would like to put themselves forward as the elected member who would have lead member status effectively, it will be unofficial, but we know the way that it will be work and allow us to get that deeper dive into there for any of those projects as we go forward. Please, if they could just email me is probably the best way, and then I'll do some juggling and see where we can get to. David Carter.
Thanks, Councillor. Just to be helpful, I wonder in between now and the next meeting, Councillor Green, if you as chair, perhaps with maybe not all of the senior officers, but if we could have a discussion, because I think I understand what you're wanting to achieve, but rather than us wait for the next meeting, can we have a chat with you and with just we'll put it as part of we'll meet at your convenience, Councillor, with you and the vice chair to try and work through it.
David, I was hoping that actually there will be several meetings between myself and you and myself, David Gray, and myself and officers on these and on various items, because we are elected to serve the residents. We are the ones who, in the end, have our signatures on the paper and our hands up in the voting decisions. And I think it's really important that we get that information in there. Yes, Sarah, obviously the next meeting is only in 2 months, and that's true. It doesn't have to be with all officers. These meetings do not have to be 20 people strong. Some will be one-on-one, some will be 1 to 2, and I'm sure we'll be able to find a way to do that to give us the benefit. But I really feel it is important that as elected members we take more responsibility for this, and I think that with some of the knowledge that we have around elected members, that we will hopefully be able to come out with even better results as we go forward to government bidding for funds, and that they'll know that we are entirely aligned with officers. We're aligned with the government's agenda on this, and hopefully it will pay dividends in the amount of money we as a body end up with to be able to pursue our transport and economic aims. So, all right. What I would ask in future, if we can make the item any other business previously advised to the chair, that would be very useful. So know where we're at. But if today, obviously, we haven't had that opportunity, are there any other items of business that anyone needs to bring forward? If not, I will say thank you very much to everyone. Apologies that we have run over by 20 minutes. I really don't think there's much more that we could have done to have kept it down. But hopefully, as we go forward, we'll be able to sort that out. All right. So thank you to all the officers. Thank you to all the members, and we will meet in a couple of months. All the best. Thank you. Enjoy the summer.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.